Yeah, I'm just okay. So welcome everybody. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Ted Benton to everyone. He's an emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Essex, and he's taught subjects like social theory and the environmental social science for many years. He has a particular interest in relationships between social and natural sciences. And alongside his work in philosophy and social theory, he's been an active natural historian and he's written a number of really excellent books. My favourite, to those who know me, is probably Solitary Bees, which is an excellent book which he co-wrote with Nick Owen. Ted received the Stamford Raffles Award in 2007, which is a prize given by the Zoological Society of London to both amateur and professional zoologists who've made distinguished contributions to zoology, usually outside the scope of their professional activities. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to hear what Ted's got to say about some of his more recent work. So, Ted, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's slightly daunting prospect to be speaking to such a distinguished society. Um, and my anxiety has been added to by the fact that I'm not great at technology, so things don't fall apart. Tony's been brilliant in training me uh, on these various processes, so I'll do my best. Um, I mean, those of you who are aware of what's happening in Colchester will be aware most, I think, of the massive 8-year-long struggle we've had to save the Army Ranges, Middlewick Ranges, from development. And that is an absolutely wonderful, nationally significant site. And that's taken the energy of most of our local environmentalists and activists over the past few years. But meanwhile, I've been doing something, and the Natural History Society has been doing something with a less high profile, but still I hope you find it interesting. We have a river, the River Colne, that runs right through the centre of, I'd still call it a town, it's now called a city, but it's not really a city. Um, and there's a small amount of green space along the river bank, and one or two meadows and a couple of more significant green spaces. Um, and I can actually start to show you where this is. I'm sorry about my daubing. The green gives you an indication of the sites that I'm particularly interested in. There's a couple of meadows here which are long established and until very recently were just close mown. There's a small local nature reserve there on the north bank. And can you see the pointer, by the way, or is it just telling me where I am?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. And a new estate here, which was built despite very strong resistance, which separates that space from this one, which is a wetland area, which is now just starting to be managed and brought into some sort of condition. But what I'm really interested in is this area, which is a narrow piece of green space next to our Roman wall. It was cleared to build a road, but that never happened, fortunately. And so the Roman road goes around like that. And so there's some green space around the Roman wall, which was close mown until 2020. And this whole area to the south of the river, quite a narrow stretch here, but widening out here with an artificial lake there, that was also almost wholly close mown until 2020. Um, now, 2020 was significant for two things locally. One was obviously COVID, and these spaces became much more extensively used by people, exercising their 1 hour allowed, which I think some people just interpreted as 1 hour required. So there was a lot of uh, um, jogging and walking and dog walking and cycling along this area. But this is how it was managed. And that was, in fact, really quite a wet meadow, which was still rigorously mown, despite the fact that the mowers often got bogged down and there was kind of problems getting them out and so on. Now, what prompted the change was this: the council, without any really clear rationalization, decided it wanted to plant 250,000 trees, and this was something that was going to save us from climate change and also protect biodiversity. This is the sort of thing they did, planting up large areas of public green space with very, very dense plantations. They called this creation of woodland. And it was quite a hard job, really, to explain them that a tree plantation isn't a woodland. And in response to this, there was quite a reaction from certainly the Natural History Society, but several other local ecologists. And we engaged quite actively with the council to try to stop them doing this. We weren't able to do that initially, but they agreed a compromise, which was that they go for low mow and the encouragement of biodiversity in areas that they weren't tree planting. And also they would allow us to give advice on which areas of green space absolutely should not be built, should not be planted up with trees, because there was flower-rich grassland that they would be destroying. So that was the compromise that was initially reached. I mean, that gives you, this is a narrow piece of green space close to the Roman wall. You can see the Roman wall there. And again, you know, lawn-like conditions. This was, I think, 2022, after a couple of years of not mowing, just an annual cut. Green alkanet is flourishes there, and cow parsley, very common plants. Red valerian up higher on the wall, and other plants, including white bryony, also growing on the wall. So a range of wild plants, nothing particularly rare, and certainly not rich grassland, but nevertheless, aesthetically greatly improved, and also with some nectar and pollen sources for insects and so on. So I think that's, yeah. Oh no, I missed that one. That's the damper area of grassland that I showed before. And this is in spring with lovely stands of meadow buttercup, and also cuckoo flowers quite abundant there, and a range of butterflies in the spring. So quite a change in the environment, and there's a kind of politics to this, that in terms of both relationships with the council and also relationships with local residents, which we could talk about if there's interest. Okay, so what I wanted to do was really just to focus on the wildlife that's developed in those 5 years since 2020. In some cases, this is wildlife that was already there, particularly some of the winter migrants and winter visitors among the birds. So this is not exactly a before-after story, but actually there is a complex history to the site, which, again, if people are interested, I can talk about. Okay, so I thought I would just take you through some of the usually common, but just occasionally quite rare species that we now have in this small area of green space, and take you through the seasons. So we start with winter. The focus is obviously going to be on birds. So on the lake, we've usually get gadwall, we usually get goosander on the river and the lake, dabchicks usually there for the winter. Um, uh, Kingfisher is a very, very frequent sight. They have a couple of spots, quite sheltered spots, where they like to fish along the river. I don't think we've got them breeding yet, but I'm hopeful. And the occasional sighting of the otter. Um, and winter visitors, including redwing and siskin. And in case you're thinking those are rather better photographs than the other ones you've seen, they're by my friend Sean Nixon, who regularly walks the same site and has so far recorded 79 bird species. And greater spotted woodpeckers, green woodpecker as well, usually seen, heron, a common visitor, little egret as well. So if we turn to spring, and I'm really thinking even as early as March, the overwintering butterflies, so the peacock has obviously seen better days, probably the first time it's been out sunbathing in the early spring. And interestingly, brimston's really a species of West Essex where there's more chalky soil. But it is spreading into East Essex. I don't think this breeds on our site, but we see it regularly. And that is something that's quite significant in that some of these species, we don't think there's a breeding population, but they are in some cases seen very regularly, in other cases seen occasionally. And it says something about the role of this site now in terms of metapopulations of some of these species on a wider scale. One of the first species of butterflies that emerges from the pupa in the spring, as distinct from overwintering, is the small white. And this is a male feeding from garlic mustard. Now, garlic mustard in this particular site, which is quite low in botanical diversity, garlic mustard does a lot of work, both as a nectar source and also as the larval food plant of several species. And this is another one of those, a green-veined white, which is really very beautiful, especially in the spring brood, and they lay their eggs. Hang on, just make sure that they lay their eggs on garlic mustard, but also on cuckoo flower. And so the damper meadow has got this lovely meadow buttercups, but also quite a lot of, of cuckoo flower. And this is one of the south-facing hedgerows, which I hope I can just mention a bit. The two meadows to the west, which are or have been normally close mown, have south-facing hedgerows that contain quite a range of different shrub species and climbers, including white bryony. And if they're left with even just a few meters unmown next to the hedge, you get a nice transitional woodland edge type effect, which is quite good for quite a few species. And we've had real difficulties sustaining this, which I'll explain. Another species, obviously, that's closely related to cuckoo flower and garlic mustard is the orange tip. And that's a female nectaring from cuckoo flower. And It is a breeding species, so they lay their eggs usually quite close to flower buds, and that's the full-grown caterpillar. And it's really remarkably shaped pupa. So that's one of our common but really quite spectacular spring butterflies, along with the holly blue, which is really quite common and can be seen almost every month through the year now. And the speckled wood, although we're particularly concerned to retain the grassland, there are quite a few trees, particularly along the river and in the shady areas by the river. The speckled wood's quite common. Interestingly, the speckled wood, until about 1992, was completely absent from our part of Essex, but is now really quite widespread. Hoverfly, Eupodes, Luniger. I just put this in just as one example. The whole area is quite rich in hoverflies, and I'm gradually trying to build up a local list of them. This is obviously one of the more common ones. And the first bee of the year usually is this one, the hairy-footed flower bee, which I guess most people would be familiar with. This is the male, which is looks a little bit like, I guess, a common carder bumblebee, but you can see why it's called the hairy-footed, because of all these long hairs on the tarsal segments. And it very frequently settles with those legs, the middle legs actually, stretched out like that. And it's a bit unclear why it does that. There's another species which is now extremely rare, on the Sussex coast, really, was where it exists. Very, very similar, almost sister species, I guess, where the male is very similar but doesn't have the hairs, and it doesn't settle like this. So that I think that the hairs must have some significance. It's not clear what it is. The female of this is almost completely black, and again, it looks like a small bumblebee. This is for the mourning bee, and it's another species of bee which lays its eggs in the nest or brood cells of the hairy-footed flower bee, and so you generally find these two species together, particularly where the flower bee is quite common. Again, quite a dramatic looking species. And this, I said we don't have any rarities, or we're not looking for rarities. We have about 10 species of bumblebees. And this year, for the first time, I was able to record the large garden bumblebee, Bombus ruderatus, which is quite similar to Hortorum, but has really much more extensive yellow at the hind end of the thorax. And this wasn't actually taken at our site, but because there it was actually feeding on white dead nettle. So we had a queen in the spring, and then there were quite a few workers seen both north and south of the river. So hopefully this has become established there. This is a national biodiversity priority species. One of the important pollen sources for solitary bees early in the year are the willow catkins, the plantations of willows along the river. And this is a solitary bee collecting pollen, and it's this one. I think Steve Falk calls it the orange-tailed mining bee. Andrena hemahoa, rather beautiful thing with these nice pollen hairs on the hind legs. And this is another one, the grey patch mining bee, which is so called because of this little patch of grey here. So it's quite, again, quite a distinctive. Most of these spring mining bees are quite difficult to separate from each other, but there are some that are fairly distinctive, and we've got a good range of them in this site. And I put that in because it's on a daisy, and in a lot of municipal sites, particularly where there's regular mowing, daisies and dandelions in the spring are about the only plants that actually get to flower. And I've been doing another study somewhere else, and it's interesting, even in those hostile or hostilely managed green spaces, uh, dandelion and daisy manage to sustain quite a lot of species of bee. And Andrena fulva, the tawny mining bee, another very beautiful one that's pretty frequent on this site. And the so-called yellow-legged mining bee. And again, if you like to complete the ecological connection there, the bee fly Bombus, Bombilius major, again, looks a bit like a small bumblebee, but in fact is a fly that parasitizes the nests of quite a range of solitary bees. And again, notice it's collecting nectar from garlic mustard. And in truth, it hasn't got a lot of choice. Just a moment for one of the orthopterans of the site. This is the slender groundhopper. Quite scarce in Essex, although I think it may be much more common than we think because it's actually quite hard to find. They don't stridulate like grasshoppers, and they tend to be extremely well camouflaged, and they skulk in sort of muddy edges of ponds and things like that. So we've got this in 2 or 3 spots, damper spots in this area, and it's a very nice thing to have. Again, from April onwards, we start to see our older flies. And since 2023, we've noticed this, the mackerel mayfly, which has this amazing yo-yo type flight. They seem to, interestingly, they seem to congregate in the close mown parts by the river, and in large numbers sort of bob up and down. And I'm not sure quite what the function of that is, whether it's some kind of something analogous to the lek. But anyway, since 2023, we've been seeing this in several days in May, and it's really quite a thrilling sight. First damselfly to appear, usually later in April, is the so-called large red damselfly. Nobody that isn't an odonatist is inclined to say, well, why do you call it the large red damselfly? It's really quite small, but in fact, it's just bigger than the small red damselfly, which is tiny. Again, it's nice to see that right early in the year. Significant plant, the Rouleaf saxifrage, which grows on the Roman wall and has survived numerous attempts to clean up the wall and repoint it and various other things. Just checking now how I'm doing for time. Okay. So in late spring, early summer, you start to see more dragonflies, more butterflies, and so on. there we got a mixture of wall barley and common mallow next to the footpath, and then along by the river itself and the bankside vegetation, quite a variety of things, such as hedge woundwort, gypsywort, purple loosestrife, and so on. Some of which, and a bit later in the year, watermint. Some of which are really quite important nectar sources. And this is the damp meadow area, and you can see again the bluebells, and you can see that people do enjoy the new appearance. So again, during May we get quite large numbers of the banded damselfly, lovely, quite common species, but it always attracts attention. There's a spot by a footbridge over the river where sometimes it's quite difficult to get by because people stop to actually look at what's going on in the river. So that's absolutely brilliant success story. Usually settling on floating water lily leaves, the red-eyed damselfly. So far, we don't have the southern red-eyed damselfly. I'm not sure why. Hopefully that will turn up. And this species, a hairy dragonfly, so called because of the quite furry thorax, is certainly when I started studying dragonflies in Essex, was really a very rare species that you just found on coastal borodikes. Subsequently, it spread, and it's now a resident species on the river through the city centre. So it's a wonderful thing to see. The first of the hawkers to appear. And the other one's a scarce chaser, another really quite, as the name implies, it's quite a scarce dragonfly. So there's a couple of we've got 19 species recorded so far on the river. And again, another of Sean's photographs, song thrush, not now a common species at all, but we do have breeding song thrushes. And I didn't put a photograph in, but Chetty's warbler, which Tony mentioned early on, you can hear them calling really along the river, all the way along on both sides now. So little family of long-tailed tits that just had a bath in the river and settling in a branch just above it. Field grasshopper. Because the grass is so tight mown, there was almost nothing in the way of grasshoppers prior to the change. And we've now got the common ones. This is the common field grasshopper. See these indents in the keels on the thorax, and the meadow grasshopper as well, and quite a small number as well of the lesser marsh grasshopper. And I have to confess that we've done almost nothing yet on the beetles, and invitations to anybody who's willing to do them or capable of doing them. This is a rose chafer, which is a local and common species. And interestingly, on yarrow, which along with the garlic and white clover, is one of the most important plants for the ecology of the system. Close to the river itself and associated with bulrush or reed mace, whichever you call it, is this little hoverfly, Anasamaya lineata, which is a very pretty little thing. And also the same place is this Parhelophilus frutatorum, which is quite a mouthful, but a very lovely hoverfly. And much more frequent, common, Helophilus pendulus, that's another one that we have. Okay, now to summer, and I think I may have to speed up a bit. So this is a bit later in the year, the wet meadow over here. And in fact, there's an underground spring here and some interesting sedges. But I put this in mainly just to show perennial ryegrass, which was the standard municipal grass planting. And so unfortunately, that limits the diversity of grass, although we do have some much more interesting grass species further on. Yarrow, which again, as I've said before, is actually quite an important species for nectar and for pollen. That's just the view from the footbridge that fascinates people. You can usually see hawker dragonflies up and down the sides, and passing butterflies and birds coming down to wash and so on. So it's actually never-ending source of fascination for people. Creeping thistle, which is generally regarded as kind of something negative if it turns up in your grassland, but it's in this site, it's actually very important, again, a very important nectar source for a lot of flies and bees and so on. To my surprise this year, what turned up was the four-banded weevil wasp, Cerceris quadricincta, which is a national rarity. We'd been finding it on Middlewick, and that's one of the species for which Middlewick's noted, but we've also got it here and in one other green space as well. And much more familiar, the bee wolf with one of its victims. And another species that spread massively recently, the large-headed resin bee, which turns up to bee hotels. And we haven't got one exactly on the site, but there's one near the Roman wall, actually within the formal park. Keep jumping slides here. Again, this turned up about 2 years ago, the pantaloon bee, now established on the site. Quite common now, but a lovely thing to see. And, you know, if you're taking people on a local nature walk, it usually attracts quite a lot of attention. And this one, which arrived, I think now about 5 years ago, the bryony bee, and as I mentioned, there's quite a lot of bryony on these hedgerows, and I mean, during the flight period, you can't avoid seeing the bryony bees with they're like small honeybees, but with this red marking on the abdomen. And so we've got quite a population of this that I'm very pleased with. And then in July, we've, in the last 2 years, found a couple of solitary bee species that we hadn't seen before. This is the large meadow mining bee, Andrena labiata. Of course, these are later than the usual spring flush of them. And the only labiate species that we have in any amount on the area is these white clovers, and alongside the meadow mining bee is this one, Melita leporina, the clover Melita. And this is a very small group of species that tend to have very narrow specialized taste in pollen, for their larvae, and believed to be perhaps the least modified since the earliest bees to evolve. So they're really fascinating little groups. So it's nice to have this there, and that's a rather worn example of the male. There are difficulties about making the white clover available to them at the right time of year. It has to mesh in with the mowing regime, and that causes some problems. I can mention in discussion if there's time. And another one on the yarrow collecting pollen is Colites similis. It's a species sort of quite closely related to the ivy bee, which we get later in the year. And the red girdle mining bee on hedgerow cranesbill, which is another one that flowers, as the name suggests, in these hedgerows. And I don't know why this is twice, maybe because I felt guilty about not having enough beetles in the show. Again, butterflies, summer butterflies. We have the full suite really of grassland butterflies, and this is obviously the Essex skipper with those black tips to the antennae. The gatekeeper, and this one, the small heath, which is, has some conservation concern, and we do get it on our site, but I'm not sure whether there's a resident population or not, whether this is just individuals turning up, because there are sites for it not very far away. And the ringlet, which tends to be in the more kind of damp, sheltered parts of the grassland. Now, this one is particularly interesting because there isn't any habitat for it. The white admiral seen so far only once, but it probably has been around more than that. We have quite significant populations of white admiral a couple of kilometres north and perhaps more 3-4 kilometres south of Colchester. And this represents a kind of stepping stone enabling mobility between these populations, so enabling a meta-population to be sustained. So it's an important function of the site, even though we don't have habitat for it to become a resident. This one, we do have habitat for it to become resident, but again, we've only seen it once on the site. That was last year, and it is beginning to establish itself on 1 or 2 local grassland sites. So again, this may be part of a process of it recolonizing and investigating this as a possible site. Okay, getting close to the end now. This is the more westerly northern grassland, which in 1 year, when we weren't consulted by a new political organisation in the town council, they went ahead and planted these tree circles on what was actually quite rich grassland. It may have increased diversity a bit, but it actually causes some problems in relation to maintaining the gap in mowing by the hedge. So this is the time of year we get the some of the leafcutter bees. This one, the wood carving leafcutter bee. Tell from the colour of its undercarriage there. This one's on knapweed, which we don't get much of, but they do visit spear thistle, which is fairly common on the site, and also burdock. Another of our orthopterans, again, good range of orthoptera that we have. This one's the long-winged conehead, and this is one using its ovipositor to split open a hole in the grass stem and lay its eggs. Hornet hoverfly, another of the many hoverfly species. And this very beautiful Myothropa florea, wonderful, beautiful hoverfly, which is really very common, but still delightful thing to see. I've recently started checking out the shield bugs, and this is the most common, probably the common green shield bug, the so-called hairy shield bug. Again, notice the yarrow. These are the offspring of the parent bug, one of the very few insects that shows maternal care of the offspring. Perhaps one of the latest flying of the dragonflies, the migrant hawker. And we mentioned this earlier, the willow emerald damselfly, which only very recently arrived, but is now abundant right along the river. And then finally, the ivy bee. And so now is the time when the ivy is flowering, when we get lots of different species on the ivy, particularly this, and also quite a few hoverflies. Oh yes, just this is the south-facing hedgerow I mentioned, which is how we wanted it, and that's what they did to it. So you turn up and you find that the mowers have been out and they've ignored the instructions they've been given, and you find whole swathes of long grass that you've been carefully monitoring has just gone. So some of the frustrations of trying to deal with a local authority, which is basically sympathetic, but contracts out its grassland management. I could have quite a bit to say about that. Okay, so that's it. So just managed the 45 minutes.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to stop the recording.